Some content existing in these videos may be too scary for some viewers. If you were easily startled, you might want to reconsider watching. If not, I hope you enjoy this video. "What time are you getting here?" I said as I called my brother for the third time tonight. The boredom of being stuck inside on the weekend sinking in. I had been alone a lot recently after tearing my meniscus a week prior. "I'll be there soon, man. I'll pick up some beers on the way." "Alright, hurry up. I'm going insane here all alone." I put down the phone and hobbled over to the couch to browse the endless shows available to me while simultaneously complaining that there was nothing to watch. I eventually settled on a comedy show that I had seen countless times before. It was just background noise until my brother arrived. He had been good at visiting me since this all happened. My friends were far too busy getting drunk and living for the weekend at one of the 3 rundown bars in town. I can't say I blamed them. I'd be doing the same if I could. I was also in a foul mood recently, and there is only so much torn meniscus complaining one person can take. I fidgeted around looking for anything to keep my mind occupied while the show played in the background. The lack of any interaction with the outside world had been slowly draining me of any life. I finally settled down when I heard a knock at the door. I had told my brother that I had left the back door unlocked. He always used the back door, as it was more accessible when walking. There was an alleyway that connected to the back that was a shortcut. The only time people used the front door was when parking out the front, but he did not drive. The knocking was rhythmic and constant. I pulled myself off the couch and slowly headed towards the door, cursing with every step. I eventually reached the hallway and leaned against the wall to take a short breath. I had heard my brother's voice telling me to let him in. It was more monotone and robotic than usual. He was just repeating the same phrase over and over. "Please, let me in." It was like a record stuck on repeat. I shouted at him to wait a second, fighting through the shooting pain in my knee as I moved towards the door. I reached the front door, but something felt off. He had repeated the same phrase around 10 times since I first heard him. There was a raspy cough after each time he spoke, as if it were a recording. It sounded the same each time. He spoke, he coughed, then there was around a 5-second break before he repeated it again. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I could not shake off the feeling that something was wrong. I asked a question through the door, but received the same robotic response. I looked through the peephole and saw someone standing with their back to me. They were much taller than my brother. I could not make out much in the dark. I moved towards the living room window and went to pull back the curtains when my phone began to buzz. It made me jump out of my skin, and my nerves were not settled when I looked at the screen. It was my brother calling. "Hello?" I timidly said. "Hey bro, sorry, just got to the shop. You want any snacks?" "That's not you outside?" "What you on about?" "I'll be there in a couple minutes. I'll just get whatever." I attempted to get out another word, but he hung up before I could speak again. I stumbled back to the couch, hands trembling, forcing me to drop my phone onto the floor. I could still hear that same voice over and over outside of the front of the house. It was almost identical to my brother's voice, other than the lack of any emotion at all. I sat there, staring off into the distance for the next few minutes, hoping that this was all just a prank. I heard the back door swing open, and it hid into the cupboards in the kitchen. I heard my brother announcing himself off in the distance. I dragged myself off of the couch and slowly moved back towards the hallway. I exited the living room and saw my brother standing at the other side of the hallway. He had concern wrapped around his face as he stood there in silence. "Who is that at the front door?" he asked, as he dropped the bag he was holding to the floor. "I thought it was you," I said as I pushed myself along the wall, moving myself further away from the front door. He eventually snapped out of his trance and began helping me towards the back door. Once we reached the back door, we stopped in our tracks. Through the panel of glass, I could see another dark figure. It was mimicking the same phrase over and over again in my brother's voice. What the heck is going on? Are you bored and pranking me? My brother said with half anger and half fear in his voice. No, I don't know anything more than you do, I said, glancing over at my brother. But that's me. I mean, it sounds just like me. We have been sitting here for over an hour now. The voices seem to be becoming more enchanting by the second. I attempted to call the police, but all I get is static. The texts I have attempted to send have all failed. I am not sure if this will get through here. I looked out of the window a moment ago to attempt to get a better look at the figure. I could not see much of anything. It felt as though, no matter where I looked, it always had its back to me. I did notice something else, though. There are dark figures standing outside of the house, all the way down the street. I can vaguely hear the figures mimicking other voices. They are not outside of every house. Some of the houses do not have a figure standing outside. Those houses have their front doors wide open. I'm an 80-year-old woman with a body that is winding down, but a mind that remains sharp as a tack. My memory is brilliant, perhaps a little too brilliant, as I am prone to remembering things I would rather forget, such as the day I encountered the Witch of Whispering Woods. This isn't a story I've told many people, and for the longest time I believed I would take it to my grave. But the burden has grown too heavy for my withered shoulders to bear, and all I want is to live out my final years in peace. God knows I need it. I grew up in a small Massachusetts town I will not name, raised in a middle-class family with 5 children. I was the baby, and my parents and siblings spoiled me. We lived in a small brick house on the edge of town, backed by acres of thick forest. That forest was known as Whispering Woods, and had been the topic of childhood nightmares for generations. Even if you didn't live in Massachusetts, or America for that matter, you have likely heard about the Salem witch trials. Well, our town wasn't too far from Salem, and we had a dark history of our own. According to local lore, a witch had been hanged in Whispering Woods, and our wrathful spirit still lingered about. As a little girl, those stories terrified me to no end, and I made sure to stay out of Whispering Woods. I imagined all manner of grotesque creatures hiding in the shadows, and I pictured the witch herself as a gnarled old hag with glowing red eyes and teeth like butcher knives. I remember this one time. I was playing ball with my sister Janet and threw it too far. It disappeared into the tree line. Janet went to retrieve it, and watching the brush swallow her up sent me into hysterics. I was convinced the witch would come and take my big sister away, never to be seen again. Fortunately, as I matured, my fears began to subside. By the fall of 1951, when I was 14 years old, I no longer believed in the Witch of Whispering Woods. The stories I had heard seemed silly and nonsensical, and besides, I was too busy with school and friends to let my imagination run wild. Still, Whispering Woods made me uneasy, and I continued to avoid the place. That is, until Marjorie Hill dared my best friend Patricia and I to spend the night there. Marjorie Hill was a loud, boisterous tomboy with long legs and a shock of curly red hair. She had a deep voice with a booming laugh and never seemed to shut up. Patricia and I found her obnoxious, and Marjorie knew this, so she went out of her way to annoy us both. Bet you couldn't last a minute in Whispering Woods. She taunted us in the schoolyard one morning. You'd both run out crying. Now don't be like that. She thumped my back, nearly knocking me right over. It's not my fault you're such a baby. You're just a bully. I dare you, Marjorie smirked. I dare both of you to spend the night in Whispering Woods. My mouth dried up. The dam within me broke and all my memories of childhood terror came flowing out. I began to shake, and Patricia put her arm around me. See? You are scared. Shut up, I yelled at her. I'll do it. As much as the thought horrified me, I couldn't give Marjorie the satisfaction of seeing me so afraid. Patricia looked at me like I had gone mad, but all I could focus on was Marjorie's freckled face as it went from smug to shocked. Really? She stammered. You'll do it? Yes, but on one condition. My brother comes with us. Gerald was a year older than me, tall and built like an army tank. Despite his imposing appearance, he was a gentle giant, but not afraid to get his hands dirty if need be. I'd feel much safer with him around. Fine, bring Gerald, said Marjorie. She whirled around me and started to walk away, then paused and looked back over her shoulder at Patricia and I. Oh, and I'm coming too. I have to make sure you guys don't try anything funny. Lorraine, Patricia whispered once Marjorie was out of sight. Are you sure about this? No, I admitted. But maybe if we prove that we aren't babies, she'll leave us alone. I'm aware of the faults in my own logic, but remember, I was young and prideful, and my anger had clouded my judgment. Now, looking back, I realized that taking Marjorie's dare was the biggest mistake of my life. I wish more than anything that I could go back in time and change what happened, set events rolling in a different direction. By telling you my story, I am also confessing my wrongdoings, and although I don't expect forgiveness, I hope you can understand why I did what I did. The plan was to set up camp in Whispering Woods and spend the whole night there, leaving only after the sun came up. When I told my parents about the plan, they were skeptical, given my past fear of the woods. I didn't tell them about the dare. Patricia and I thought it might be fun, I lied. Besides, we'll have Gerald with us. It took some convincing, but eventually my parents agreed, as long as we didn't go too deep into the woods. I called Patricia and she told me her parents had also agreed to the trip. Everything was set, and at 5:30 the following evening, Gerald and I left our house with our tent, food, water, sleeping bags, and whatever else we might need. We met up at the head of the main trail with Marjorie and Patricia. It was Marjorie, of course, who took the lead. We'll camp out in the clearing, she announced. The tree they hang the witch from used to stand there, but after she died, the bark turned black and the surrounding grass turned dry and yellow, so the townspeople cut it down, believing it to be cursed. You just made that up, I accused. No, I didn't. It's true. We walked the trail in relative silence. I marveled at how normal Whispering Woods appeared, with its towering trees and leafy green bushes. Birds chirped up in the branches and squirrels scurried around in the bush. It didn't look anything like a haunted forest should. That said, there was still something sinister in the air, clinging to us like thick black smoke. Patricia clung to my arm, her body stiff as a board, fear crackling beneath her skin like electricity. Gerald kept his hands shoved into his pockets, his face pale and tight-lipped. Only Marjorie remained unaffected, skipping along and humming to herself. The sky had turned hazy purple with twilight by the time we arrived at the clearing. We set up camp and I helped Gerald build a fire. I found myself jumping at every snapping twig, every bird call. My terror of this place was creeping back in. Marjorie noticed and began to laugh. Poor Lorraine, she sneered. I knew you wouldn't last. Leave her alone, said Gerald. Look, Marjorie pointed, that's the stump of the old tree. The four of us walked over to investigate. The stump had dozens of rings, indicating it was very old. Marjorie groaned and muttered, It looks normal. See? You did make that story up. Did not. Okay. Gerald waved a hand between us. Let us go back to camp. We cooked dinner and sat around the fire for a while, talking about everything and nothing. By that point, the sky was pitch black, veiled in clouds, with no moonlight or stars in sight. Whispering Woods had gone silent around us. There wasn't so much as a single cricket chirping. Patricia bumped her knee against mine and whispered, I have to go to the bathroom. So go. No, Patricia shook her head. I don't want to go alone. Okay, I'll come with you. We excused ourselves and walked across the clearing to a small clump of bushes. I turned away to give my friend privacy while keeping an eye on the flickering fire. Gerald and Marjorie were huddled close together, in a way that seemed a little too intimate. The thought of Marjorie Hill dating my brother made me sick to my stomach. Lorraine, Patricia whispered. Lorraine, come over here. I looked. She was standing on the opposite side of the bushes, and although I could only make out shadows and shapes, I sensed that she was genuinely spooked. What's wrong? I asked, my voice cracking midway through. Come here. I went to stand next to her, clicking on my flashlight and casting it across the forest floor. I was not prepared for what I found. The biggest buck I had ever seen, sprawled at our feet. Its neck was bent at a grotesque angle. Its swollen purple tongue bulged out, and pink, slimy intestines spilled out of a hideous gash along its belly. I dry heaved, my hands clutching my stomach. Patricia began to cry. She loved animals and couldn't stand seeing them hurt. I put my arm around her and guided her back to camp. What's wrong? Gerald demanded, jumping to his feet. Dead deer, I mouthed over Patricia's curly, strawberry blonde head. My brother took my flashlight from me and went to investigate himself. Patricia and I sat down next to Marjorie, who was braiding blades of grass together. A minute later, Gerald came back, looking pale. What on earth could have done that, he gasped. A wolf? Or maybe it was a bear? I don't know. Maybe we should leave, said Marjorie. This was your idea, I reminded her, although I wouldn't mind leaving these woods. Not at all. The carcass did look fresh, said Gerald. It might not be safe. He was cut off by a shrill, blood-curdling scream from the direction of the dead buck. It was so loud it made the leaves on the trees shake. I clamped my hands over my ears and fell back while Patricia gripped my arm like a vice and wailed. Gerald shouted for us to stay calm. Marjorie jumped up and ran like every demon in hell was chasing her. Hey, I screamed. Get back over here, you coward. What the heck is she doing? Gerald hollered. Patricia shrieked and pointed. Gerald and I followed her gaze to two tiny pinpricks of light floating between two trees. The realization that they were eyes hit me like a freight train, and my legs gave out. I collapsed to my knees, shaking, and Gerald put his hand on my back. Get up, Lorraine. Come on, get up. Behind the eyes came an animalistic hiss. There was a rustling in the bushes, soft footsteps that sounded like gunfire in the dark. The thing moved closer, those eerie glowing eyes on us. Slowly, a form began to emerge. In the orange glow of the fire, I could make out a human shape, but not much beyond that. When Gerald reached for his flashlight, I screamed "No" at him, but it was too late. My brother cast the light directly onto the thing before bellowing, "Run." Him, Patricia, and I took off. The horrible abomination gave chase, snarling and hissing like a cat. I had seen it. In the split second between Gerald shining his flashlight and yelling at Patricia and I to run, I had seen the Witch of Whispering Woods. How I managed to process so much detail in such a short time span is a mystery to me, but whatever the case, the image of that creature has been seared into my mind like those brands put on cattle. The witch was ghastly pale, with eyes that glowed like twin stars and a gaping maw filled with jagged, yellow teeth. Wisps of flyaway hair clung precariously to her scalp. Her neck was abnormally long. Her back was so hunched that she moved like a gorilla, bony, knuckled hands scraping the forest floor. She howled, hissed, shrieked, and cackled as she lumbered after us. We kept running, screaming for help, even though we knew no one would hear us. At one point, I lost my shoes. Sharp rocks, twigs, and brambles cut my feet, but my horror drowned out the pain. My lungs were on fire. My throat was raw from screaming. I thought I knew true fear. How wrong I was. A root caught my foot and sent me sprawling face first. My nose broke, spilling hot, coppery blood down my chin. Gerald and Patricia, who hadn't noticed, disappeared around a bend in the trail. Immediately I felt the witch's hot, rancid breath on the back of my neck. She twisted her gnarled fingers into my hair and wrenched my head back. I screamed as loud as I could, but to no avail. The witch brought her dry, blackened lips to my ear and hissed in my ear. I am not ashamed to admit my bladder let go. The sharp sense of urine mixed with the foul aroma of the witch's breath, and I nearly passed out. Just as the witch clamped her vicious teeth around my neck, Gerald came tearing back down the trail, his fists swinging, his face red and twisted into an ugly mask of pure rage. With one powerful thrust of his light, he kicked the witch in the head, hard enough that her neck snapped back with an ear-splitting crack. The witch shrieked and dug her talons into my back, piercing my skin. Gerald kicked her again, and finally, the horrible creature rolled off of me. "Come on," Gerald yelled. I staggered to my feet, and so did the witch. Her neck was snapped in two just like the buck's, but she seemed unfazed, her eyes blazing, her lips curled back in a furious snarl. "Go," Gerald bellowed. I took off again, sobbing hysterically, knowing my brother probably wouldn't come back. I caught up with Patricia, who had collapsed, crying and vomiting up her dinner. We heard thundering footsteps and looked up to see a mob of men from the town approaching. One of them scooped me up and cradled me close. Father. It's okay, little one, he cooed, his normally gruff voice gentle and serene. It's okay. I tried to tell him that Gerald was still in the woods with that thing, but I could only babble incoherently, unable to string together a coherent sentence. Thankfully, Father seemed to understand. He handed me to my mother and followed the other men into Whispering Woods, each carrying a weapon, charging like soldiers into battle. Most of the town, it seemed, had gathered at the edge of the woods. I saw Marjorie sobbing in her mother's arms and wanted to scream at her for leaving us behind, but I couldn't. I knew she was the one who had alerted the townspeople to our situation, and for that, I had to be grateful. From the woods came an ungodly cacophony of screams and gunshots. Smoke rose from the treetops, and I swore I could smell blood. 5 minutes later, Father returned, clutching shredded mass of blood, flesh, and fabric that had once been my brother. That was when I passed out. Gerald was buried in the town cemetery. He and 4 others died in the woods that night. The men had shot at the witch until she retreated, growling and dripping blood. Our campsite was discovered the next day, all our belongings torn to shreds. Fragments of the witch's fingernails were found embedded in my back. My broken nose never quite healed right, and years later when plastic surgery became an option, I chose not to have it corrected. I wanted to remember what I'd been through, what had happened that night. Mother was catatonic for months after Gerald's death. Marjorie's family left town a year later, leaving the carnage behind. Patricia and I remained best friends, our bond deepened by our horrific ordeal. Years passed, and I married, moved to Boston, raising a family of my own. I would often visit my childhood home, of which I still had countless good memories, but I could never escape the shock of what I'd seen, the guilt of what I'd done. To this day, I blame myself for my brother's death. Whispering Woods still stands to this day, as if nothing ever happened. I know the witch is still there. I wonder if she remembers us. I wonder if she knows Patricia and I are still alive. The wounds in my back left ugly purple scars, and on the anniversary of that night, they tingle and burn. Every now and then, I have nightmares of that horrible face leering at me from the shadows. I can still hear the sounds that creature made as it chased us. I can still feel and smell her breath. So there you have it. The story of my night in Whispering Woods. The story of how my brother died to protect me. The story of the scars on my back. I don't blame Marjorie for what happened. She didn't truly believe there was a witch in Whispering Woods, and she couldn't have known what would happen. I haven't seen her since she moved away. I wonder where she is now, if she's even still alive. Does she blame herself too? This past week, Patricia passed away from old age. I returned to town for her funeral, and after the mourners had left, went to visit Gerald's grave. Take care of Patricia once she gets to heaven, I whispered, just like you took care of me. As I turned and walked away, I swear I felt a strong hand on my back pushing me forward, but it was probably just the wind.